What is up, harvesters? Welcome back to my subscribers, and if you're new here, welcome to Hobby Harvest. My name is Ken. So today I want to talk to you guys about how to improve the genetics of the deer herd on your property. And so first off, I want to establish what exactly are the genetics we're talking about. So up front, what are most guys worried about is antler size, right? So we can definitely talk about the antler genetics of your herd and how to improve those. But the other thing that I like to talk about when talking about genetics is body size as well. So there's a lot of situations where you might have a small body deer, big rack, or vice versa. And then, of course, I'm going to also touch on your overall herd size and your herd health with the genetics as well. So let's get into it. So first of all, I want to put something to rest. I am not going to talk about trigger control or having cull deer on your property. That is a huge misconception. It reminds me of a story of a guy that I talked to before opening of gun deer season one year, and he was jokingly saying that they had been shooting cull bucks off of their property for 30 years now, and the herd was no different. The genetics were no different than what they were 30 years ago. Now, that's 100% accurate for many reasons. Primarily is your does carry half of your genetics, and which does are you culling for better antler genetics? You can't tell. So part of the reason is you're just not able to do it. There's been studies where they've tried to do it in a caged area, and they have been able to breed larger antlers over several generations, but you're just never going to achieve that in the woods. And removing one bad buck is not going to do anything when we're talking about trying to control the overall genetics on your property that way. So we're just going to throw that one out. Now, while we are talking about culling does, I have also heard of a situation where you might see a doe, and this is sometimes called the barren doe, where you see a big doe by herself without any fawns, and guys will shoot her as well thinking she's an old doe, she doesn't have fawns. That's also a big misconception. She is most likely a year and a half old doe who was either not bred when she was 6 months old the previous year when she was a fawn, or she just didn't have the body mass to carry those fawns all the way through the winter, and so she miscarried them along the way somewhere. That is one of your young does who is going to be producing fawns for you for years and years to come. Consider passing on her unless you really, really just want to put some venison in the freezer. But I would highly recommend taking a poke at something else other than that barren doe in the woods. Now, when we get into like antler size and body size, so I have property in northwestern Wisconsin. We have very large bodied deer up there, but their racks are not that big. And that's because they're up there in the big woods. There is not a lot of high quality food available. There's no egg. We're talking just big woods up there. Now, we can talk about down in like Texas, those deer, they'll have some really big racks down there, but us Wisconsin boys, we kind of laugh at them. They look like comical, like who strapped this huge 12-point rack onto this little 6-month-old scrawny body of a deer for what we're used to body size up here in the northern part of the country. And so that's where you end up shooting a huge, huge buck antler-wise in the south, but you can basically drag him out over your shoulder because he doesn't weigh anything. Where in the North Woods, what you'll find is a year and a half old buck will dress out over 140 pounds. So you're getting a lot more meat off a smaller deer in the North Woods. Some guys are hunting for meat, other guys are just hunting for the garnish, that is the antlers. Or maybe you're hunting for both. I always joke that, I'm always out to shoot the biggest buck in the woods, but I'm still going to take what is going to fill my tag for that season in the situation I'm hunting in. And so the reason why those northern deer have much larger bodies is because of winter. It's also why the rut is so much more intense in the North Woods, because those fawns have to be born during a very specific time after the snow melts and we're starting to get some growth for them for cover and food, but early enough in the season that they'll have put on enough body weight before they have to survive a winter. And that window is sometimes as small as 6 months. They have 6 months to be dropped on the ground, grow up into a deer that's big enough to survive a harsh winter of 6 months itself. So that's why years and years and years of those small deer not making it through the winter genetically have died off, and the big bodied deer have survived up there to the point that they have very large bodies. There's a ton of meat on them. We're talking that a 4.5, 5.5 year old buck up there is going to dress out over 200 pounds up there. These are very, very big animals compared to what you're going to see further south. And that's just the reason why, is they've had to be that big in order to survive. Now the problem is their racks aren't that big because there's not as much nutrition in the woods, and they just don't grow that big of a rack. It may also be because they're putting all the nutrition they get towards their body size in order to be able to survive to the next season. So when we want to work on improving the genetics on our herd, the first thing we need to do is analyze our herd. So I like to do this for the bucks on something like a mock scrape, because bucks are easy enough to tell apart. Yeah, a couple of those 1.5-year-old bucks, they might look pretty similar to each other, but your older bucks will typically have something with their rack that's going to make them look unique, and you'll be able to get a good census on what bucks are in your area. But we also want to take a census of those does, and I have found that it's a lot easier to put a trail cam on something like a food plot so you can see the overall size of your doe herd and about how many there are and what kind of fawns they have with them year to year. Now, I would not recommend putting a camera on a food plot like all year long. You're only going to need it out there for like maybe a week, if that. These does should be hitting up those food plots every single night. You're going to get a really good census on them. If you keep those cameras out there any longer than that, they're just going to be burning through your chips and burning through your batteries, because they stay on food plots for such an extended period of time as compared to like a mock scrape where they hit it up, rub on it a little bit, and they're right on down the trail. So then once we've assessed what deer are currently on our property, we want to set reasonable goals for increasing these genetics. And so what you can do to increase their genetics is just simply provide them what they don't have. And in most cases, it's going to be nutrition. So down south, like in Texas, they don't have that big of a body. Again, they need nutrition to try to put more pounds on their body, higher protein foods, the type of things we plant in food plots. Now in the north, no different. They need nutrition. They need that high quality nutrition. Mineral sites, if it is legal for you to put them out. I know in Wisconsin, most of the northern part of the state, it is still legal to put out baits, minerals, things of that nature. So those are the stuff you are definitely going to want to focus on having out there for them. These are things that are going to help build those antlers in those northern parts and build that body weight in the southern parts. But we need to have reasonable expectations of what we're going to get out of that. So there was a study where they took deer from different parts of the country, down south like Texas, up north like Wisconsin, and out in like the mountain areas, put them all into a pen, and they tried to get their genetics under control. So what they did was they gave them perfect food. They had food plots planted, they gave them all the grains, perfect diet. So every single meal of the day, they were eating a perfect diet. And what they found was it actually took 3 generations to actually get all of those deer from different parts of the country to start to look the same genetically. So this is a generational thing we're going to be working on here. Now, yes, those deer did themselves grow more than expected, but those small body deer only put on like an extra 10 pounds. Those small antler deer only put on like an extra inch of expected growth each year. So it was very minimal, and we want to just make sure we have these expectations in check. I don't want you to believe that if you put a food plot in northern Wisconsin that all of a sudden you're going to have these huge rack bucks walking around if you're just dealing with these little basket 8s every year, like I most likely am up there a lot more years than not. So up on my property in northwestern Wisconsin, a buck that is in the top 25%, most of them aren't even going to break the top 50% by my southeastern Wisconsin food plot. And that's because southeastern Wisconsin's a lot more ag, a lot more cover, thick cover, like creek bottoms and swamps and stuff of that nature. And there's way less predation. There's no big cats, bears, wolves, all of that in the southern part of the state that we have in the northern part of the state. So this is something that just keep those expectations in check. We're not going to grow giant deer year one. This is something that we're going to have to continually work on year after year after year. And it's going to work actually generationally better for us than it is going to work on that specific deer that we're feeding at that time. So as we continue to improve the habitat on our property, we're going to be working on the genetics of those deer. But what it's also going to do for you is attract those young bucks that are dispersing from the neighboring areas. So for those of you that don't know, when a buck is about 1.5 years old, he disperses from where he grew up. I think just naturally this is a way for nature to prevent inbreeding. I think his mom might kick him away. I've definitely seen does be very mean to those nub bucks and year and a half old bucks. But I think that might be what kicks them away, and they just leave like in a straight line. And we can prove this. They put collars on these bucks to see where they're going, and they just leave in like a straight line and they go search for their new home. And in many cases, they'll travel a long, long distance. It's usually dependent on habitat. In the big woods, they'll travel about 3 miles, but in big open ag areas, they'll travel as much as 20 miles. And the reason for this is they're just traveling until they get to that next good quality habitat. So if you're the one providing that, you're going to have all of these young bucks, year and a half old bucks, heading towards you from every direction around you when they disperse. And when they find your property, they're going to stick there and they're going to call that home. So what that does for your genetics is if you feel that you have poor genetics where you are, you're attracting all of these young bucks from all over the place around you. They're bringing in new genetics, and then when they start breeding into your doe population, we're just hoping that Mother Nature takes control and lets those good genes flourish and stomps out those bad genes. So if you can bring more genes into your area, the more likely you are to improve your gene quality overall just based on that. So you definitely want to have that good habitat just to attract those young bucks as well. And I did a video on this. I'll link it at the end so you guys can check that out if you want more information on that specifically. But the thing to keep in mind with that is that not all young bucks disperse. From what we can tell, again, with tracking collars, only about 70% of those young bucks disperse. So when I was talking about like generationally improving the deer on your habitat, that doesn't really do you any good if your young bucks leave every year. But we actually find that only about 70% disperse each year. So that other 30% that stick around, we're going to have them increase their genetics year after year after year. Some people believe that that 30% stick around because that buck's mom died or was dispersed herself for whatever reason. Maybe she was chased across the country by a buck during the rut or whatever. But we do know that around 30% of those young bucks do stick around. So those are the ones we're going to try to work on to increase their genetics generation after generation. Now, that being said, we just attracted all these year and a half old bucks, and we have those year and a half old bucks that stuck around. What we want to do is set our harvest goals appropriately. So even if you have bad genetics in your deer herd, a 5.5-year-old buck is still going to be a nice buck. Now, yeah, he might be what a 3.5-year-old buck is somewhere else where they have better genetics, better habitat, and so on. But a 5.5-year-old deer is still going to be a nice deer regardless of how bad your genetics are. So if you can just get all of those deer to a higher age structure, you're going to grow even the bad genetic bucks into bigger bucks. So you may need to work on like talking with your neighbors, setting harvest goals for your areas, setting harvest goals for your own camp. Now, I'm a huge believer that if you want to put venison in the freezer and you're not in a situation where you can be shooting does, so like this is my northwestern Wisconsin property, we can't be taking does out up there because our herd is just not big enough at this point. But I had roughly 15 to 20 year and a half old bucks on that property last year, and for the deer density up there, that is a very, very, very high number. It's the highest we've ever seen, and I've been hunting that property for over 25 years. But in that situation, I would almost lean towards harvesting one of those year and a half old bucks. If they have a bad winter like they did last winter, there's about a 50% chance that those fawns and those year and a half old deer are not going to make it through the winter anyway. So by taking out one of those younger bucks, if you have a ton of them, like if your property is working correctly and attracting all of these young bucks to your property, like mine is up there, I would recommend taking out a young buck if you're just looking to put venison in the freezer. Let those 2.5, 3.5-year-olds grow up even more. You're not hurting anything too much by taking out a year and a half-year-old. Like I said, he had probably a 50% chance of dying last year because they did have such a rough winter that just kept going and going and going, and it just didn't end. They finally just lost their last snow a couple weeks ago. But now if you are in a situation where you are attracting a lot of does and maintaining a large doe herd, this is why you also need to keep an eye on your deer herd, because if you start getting to a situation where you're seeing bucks consistently, and you got to monitor this year to year, but if you're seeing bucks consistently and then all of a sudden you're going on a sit and you're like, I didn't see anywhere near as many bucks as I would typically see on a sit, but I saw a ton of does. Well, this is a good indicator that you're in a situation where you need to start taking some of those does off your property, because what's happening is those does are taking over that high quality habitat that you've established, and they're pushing those bucks out to that next layer. And so what you want to do is eliminate a couple of those does, make some room for those bucks to come move in closer so that you're seeing them during the daylight more often. But like I said, this is not what I have going on my northwestern Wisconsin property. We lose so many young deer during those harsh winters that keeps those doe populations enough in check that we don't need to be doing that. And that's why I recommend going after a 1.5-year-old buck if you are attracting everyone from your neighbors during that dispersal time of year. And so, like I said, what you're going to want to do is just keep track of this year after year after year. Keep a journal. I keep it in a Google Doc. It's free. You get like 15 gigs of space on that. It links up to your Gmail account. Google owns YouTube, so if you're on YouTube here using your Gmail, you can just click up in the upper right-hand corner. It'll take you right to Google Docs as well. You can access that from anywhere that has internet, your phone or whatever. So great spot to just keep a journal. I keep a hunting journal during gun deer season, and it's not even all hunting related. Yeah, I keep track of like our sits and our harvests and all that kind of stuff, but I also just keep track of fun things that happened that year at camp and whatever. My northwestern Wisconsin property is deer camp to me. It's a lot more than just going up there and shooting a deer. It's about the whole camp, getting away for like a whole week with the guys, getting into the woods, having a beer, lying to each other about all your hunting and fishing stories, and that is just awesome deer camp stuff. So I keep a journal just for that, but I also keep a journal about the deer herd as well. Great habit to get into. You can always look back then when you're hanging out at deer camp of what happened 20 years ago or whatever once you've been doing this long enough. Highly recommend doing that. And the other thing is, yeah, keep those trail cams out there. Save some of your videos or pictures off of those if those help you to remember what your herd was like year to year, specific bucks you were after or whatever. Great way to just keep this stuff documented so you can see what progress you're making year to year by creating all these habitat improvements on your property. And so lastly, as you are watching for these changes in your habitat, you need to make adjustments. So you might want to change your harvest goal. So maybe you did set a 3-point on one side limit or something on a property where you didn't have great antler growth, and now you are seeing larger and larger bucks on your property. Maybe you up that to 4 on one side or whatever you want to do on your property. You also need to keep those does in check, like I said. So some years you may want to harvest does, other years you may not. Like I said, in that North Woods, we got to really pay attention to how harsh our winters were before we're setting harvest goals each year as well, because that has a greater effect on our deer numbers than literally anything up there, including all of those big predators, the cats, the bears, the wolves, all of that. So that's really it, guys. If we provide a higher quality food source, higher quality habitat to support the deer that are attracted to that food source, if we can keep attracting those young bucks onto our property, and then of course set appropriate harvest goals for all of them, we're really going to build the genetics of the deer on our property. Over the years, we're going to see this increase the size of their bodies, the size of their antlers, and the overall health and density of the deer on our property. So if you guys have been doing stuff like this on your property and you've been monitoring what the changes have been year to year, let me know down in the comments. Let me know what's worked for you, how much change you have seen in your deer herd year to year to year to year of doing this. I know that just out of all the years I've been doing it, we've definitely increased the size of the antlers per deer. We used to have a ton of deer that never had brow tines. It is rare for us to see a deer that doesn't have brow tines now. But the deer on our property don't have a lot of mass to their rack, so I had a feeling that those tines were getting broken off. You could really see that they looked like they were broken off more than they didn't grow. And since we've been providing the higher quality habitat, they're stronger, I guess, maybe more protein, more calcium, whatever. And so they don't break off now. And so just let me know down in the comments what you guys have seen. That's just something weird I saw that it seems to have worked. We see more points, bigger deer more consistently. And that's just something that's awesome, that really makes you feel like all this work you put into the woods is having a positive effect on your deer herd. All right, guys, so if you feel like you got some value out of this, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you really like this video, YouTube really thinks you're going to enjoy this one too, so go check that out, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.